like to talk about, maybe I can break this into three areas.
Into three areas. I'd like to talk about a strategy of engagement, primarily diplomacy. I'd like then to talk about a structure that kind of stands, or should stand behind that effort. And as the backbone of all that, a defense transformation, which has not occurred. One thing I think Mr. Rumsfeld did have right is that the military needed to transform, and that's one of the great tragedies of this war, is that transformation has never occurred. Or it has, only in bits and pieces, not a comprehensive whole. I strongly believe that, I'll say one thing at the beginning, I think the Democratic Party may be on the cusp of regaining the credibility in national defense credentials that it has been at a deficit in, for I would say, about 3 or 4 decades. For better or for worse, the perception is that we have been at a deficit. And I'll state up front, to some degree I think how we're handling Iraq is eroding the ability to try to grasp those credentials and hold on to them. But I'll put that to the side and we'll talk about it at the end. I honestly believe that a strategy of engagement is something that this last 6 or 7 years has neglected, this administration. We look at what we did with North Korea. We outsourced our leadership to China. We outsourced our leadership in Iran to the European Union. And I can't tell you who we outsourced our leadership to in the Middle East. We finally have gone some practical roundabouts in this. Belatedly, we finally dealt with the North Koreans, and where we told General Powell to depart that country, don't negotiate with them. We think they've been cheating on their efforts to turn to gain some digital materials, which we now know that intelligence is at best suspect. We find that belatedly we've gone back and we now have a North Korea that we've come to negotiations with, and we're at the same place where the Clinton administration handed over the agreed framework of the missile moratorium. Well, actually, we haven't gotten the missile moratorium back yet, but only after 7 more materials for 8 or 7 to 8 more bombs had been produced, and they actually exploded one, and they broke the missile moratorium. I honestly believe that what we've done, starting after World War II, is the correct strategy. If you remember, after World War I, we failed to have the League of Nations come about. We didn't establish any World Bank or IMF, and so therefore the Great Depression happened, and there was no a series of international agreements by which we could focus upon that, work with that, nor anything like the United Nations or the 52 or so defense arrangements that we had after World War II, by which we could potentially manage the situation, and as the Great Depression led to fascism and other types of not so good things, we had World War II. But after World War II, we had a different approach. We established all those defense arrangements I mentioned, established the IMF, we established the World Bank. We actually had these numerous defense arrangements out there, and we basically won the Cold War. Right after that Cold War, we began to modify these arrangements. We expanded NATO, for instance. And so there was an effort to try to craft in this new world a way that international organizations under U.S. leadership would help us go about this world. We've had the exact opposite approach. I can remember leading an aircraft carrier battle with those 30 ships in the war in Afghanistan, dropping bombs and doing retaliatory strikes. And I had a Japanese admiral with his ship under my command. Italian, Spanish, Greeks, German admirals, and from all over the world. 20 of those 30 ships were non-U.S. I was then told to leave the Indian Ocean, go into the Persian Gulf, what we thought at the time would be the running start to the war, for those who have read the different types of planning for this war. We were going to start on a running start. Only the British and the Australians were through the Straits of Hormuz. All the other nations stayed behind. When you look at our effort in Bosnia, over 50% of our forces that went in were non-U.S. When you look at our efforts in the first Gulf War, where 50% of the Allied forces were non-U.S., and compare it to less than 10% were non-U.S. in Iraq, you can see that we've decided to go about this war differently. Both in our diplomacy in the Middle East, as I used an example, belatedly now we're dealing with Iran, where we had outsourced it, and also militarily. My belief is we have to return to a strategy of engagement where diplomacy leads. One good example to me is that unique time where Israel and Lebanon, the Hezbollah, had the conflict recently, several months ago. Right after that happened, we had 7 Arab nations that condemned Hezbollah. 7. We had a unique window for a few days in order to go across, gather them together under one umbrella, march to Syria diplomatically, and put the pressure upon Syria to do something over the reins that it had over Hezbollah, knowing that Iran was pulling the strings over there, because those 7 nations know that right after Israel, they are on Iran's hit list. We didn't. We flew over, did a very nice photo op with Secretary of State, and continued on to an Asian conference in Southeast Asia. We missed a diplomatic opportunity to have not only address that war, but potentially to move the peace process further down the road. And that, to my mind, is the major lesson I learned in the Clinton administration. That engagement can work, but it needs U.S. leadership and involvement in the world for other nations to be willing to take the risk. Only when Jerry Adams came together with Leon Paisley, Catholic, Republican, Catholic and Protestant, and had political accommodation, did you beget military or militia security in Northern Ireland. We go about it the exact opposite way in Iraq. The belief that military security will beget political accommodation. I think it's the wrong approach to this world. Second, I think our structures, as some people will talk about here, do need addressing. Before 9/11, we always had away games. We liked our wars over there. After 9/11, we had home games, we found out, right here in the United States. This would take a transformation of which some will speak to, whether it's how do we address the issue of civil rights when you have to some degree, be more concerned about listening in the United States. How do you treat terrorists, alien non-combatants, or alien combatants? How do you treat them without putting them in limbo down the get-go? The National Guard. I can remember joining up during Vietnam and hearing for decades how the Army, wisely in its mind, put so much of its logistical and other types of armament into the National Guard, bent under then Chief of Staff Shai Meyer after the Vietnam War, that never again will America send its army to war without the nation going through. So that if the National Guard had to go, that meant the nation really wanted to do this war because they'd be yelping otherwise. Now, things are a little different. And that's going to be addressed. Particularly when you have attendant to this issue of who is our homeland security force, so to speak, and what's the role potentially for the National Guard. And these are the issues that I feel we addressed in a very tactical way with the urgency of the next problem that comes to the plate, rather than a strategic plan and thinking about how can you address the issue of dealing with a new plethora of threats that go all the way from counter-narcotics, illegal immigration, terrorism, all the way up to a concern that some have that China may be a growing military power. I don't think China per se is anything like the Soviet Union, and yet there's Taiwan. It's like a dog that has two tails, China and the United States. And if Taiwan were to do something, those tails could unwillingly flash as the dog begins to shake them.